the public. So we will be prioritising questions from individuals over developers and boroughs, because there have been separate sessions for you guys, but we will get to as many as possible. For technical support, as I say, use the chat function. You can pin a presenter by right-clicking on their screen, and a recording of this session will be made available. Due to the recording, this will be on YouTube, which you should have in your invite email, a link to the YouTube channel where we'll put it. And due to the recording, your video and audio is not visible, and the Q&A chat function part will not be published. At the moment, all attendees are muted and we can't see or hear you. That's definitely not my favourite for engagement, but it does allow us to record, which has benefits for you being able to watch and come back to us with other questions. And please feel free to like each other's questions, because if there are a lot, we then know which ones to best prioritise. So Natalie, next slide. Thank you. To give an overview of the Good Quality for Homes for All Londoners guidance, it was developed over 2018 and 19 with our Regen colleagues and May architects. We convened a sounding board comprised of the Mayor's design advocates, housing developers and borough representatives to help steer its development over time. And they looked at it at kind of key stages. In August 2018, there was a workshop facilitated by May Architects and the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust to engage young Londoners on the key quality of life indicators and priorities for housing design from their perspective. In October 2018, we had an Urban Design London workshop with boroughs on the design-led approach to site optimisation, which I'm going to talk quite a bit about today. In March 2020, we launched the pre-consultation draft at the Designing a City for All Londoners event, Good Growth by Design event. This was launched by Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe. There was a question and answer session that followed a presentation on the guidance to an audience of built environment professionals. And then, of course, we expected the mayor elections and to consult after that, slightly earlier in 2020. But of course, the world changed, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had this delay. So we launched formal consultation on the 13th of October this year, and it runs until the 15th of January. And we have a number of online consultation events over that time, many of which are past, but we also have our email address if you want to get in touch with us before you submit a formal consultation response to ask any questions. Thank you. So the purpose of the London Plan guidance is to help, of course, implement London Plan policies on housing design, and it focuses mainly on ensuring development of the highest quality whilst optimising site capacity on all scales of site to meet ambitious targets and address housing need, which we know in London is considerable. This means that we're trying to ensure that sites are built out to deliver as many units as they can, whilst maintaining the principles of good internal and external design that we think are important for good quality of life to those that live both in and around them. So that's quite different to optimising sites capacity, or how many units you can get on a site is quite different to maximising at all costs. So in particular, the guidance is designed to enable housing supply as well through small sites, through smaller housing developments, recognising the need for a renewed focus on the delivery of small sites and to get them to do more for delivering for London. The overall purpose, in line with London Plan objectives, is to support good growth. And the delivery of good growth is a key agenda for the Mayor's office and is enshrined within the new London Plan through a set of objectives. To quote the Mayor, good growth is described as being about working to rebalance development in London towards more genuinely affordable homes for working Londoners to buy and rent. And it's about delivering a more socially integrated and sustainable city where people have more of a say and growth brings the best out of the existing places, whilst providing new opportunities for communities. Good growth is not about supporting growth at any cost, which for too long has been the priority, leaving many Londoners feeling excluded and contributing to a lack of community cohesion and social integration. Slide. Thank you. More specifically, the Good Quality Homes for All Londoners guidance is providing guidance on design policies D1 to D7 and housing policies H1 to H2 largely of the new London Plan. And the design policies, I think it's worth noting, are more detailed than the previous London plan. And they replaced what was the old density matrix, or SRQ matrix, that became somewhat arbitrary and inaccurate at determining site capacities in the past. It was particularly difficult on large sites. So for anyone who isn't aware of the density matrix in the last London plan, it was a table that provides a broad estimate of density that you would want in an area in units per hectare. But that density was calculated using the public transport accessibility level of the area that you were looking at, and then a kind of classification of whether or not it was urban, suburban, or central. And to figure out if it was urban, suburban, or central, you needed to look at the distance from a town centre and the type of housing in an area. So, for example, low rise, post-war, 1930s 1950s semi-detached versus large towers. And in that immediate area, and then you would look at where that was in the density matrix, and you would come up with these units per hectare. But as I said, it was slightly arbitrary, and it became inaccurate at best determining what was appropriate for a site. So new policy sets out a design-led approach to optimizing site capacity, using residential building types to identify the indicative capacity of a site or area, together with careful consideration of housing design standards that protect the quality of life of residents. And this is really key and kind of moves us on into the new era of how we will look at sites under the new London plan. So to recap on the policies that the guidance is married to, in order to determine site capacities, so D1, that's London's form, character and capacity for growth, encourages boroughs to carry out robust character studies in the first instance to define the qualities and character of places, and then be able to determine how much growth capacity there is for an area. So this includes factors to take into account in character studies to help standardise the process across all of the London boroughs that, of course, are plan making for London. And this policy requires boroughs to meet their growth requirements of the London plan, using studies to assess capacities and then produce estimates of new homes for the sites that they have identified for development. And we estimate that capacity using this new design-led approach. A key part of this policy is that the process of gathering evidence and producing character studies to decide the scale of growth that is appropriate for an area means that the opportunity to engage and collaborate with the local community and stakeholders is well embedded into the plan making process. And this also enables communities to see why scales of growth and change are being proposed at the early stages before it's even enshrined into a plan, and then can help and be involved with shaping your surroundings and developing the policy for the area long before a planning application comes in that's going to be decided against those policies. Policy D2, infrastructure requirements for sustainable densities, requires proposals for sites, and that's sites that are identified by local planning authorities in their plans, or applications received by planning departments from developers or individuals, to be linked to existing and future levels of infrastructure and be proportionate to a site's connectivity and accessibility to jobs and services. It also requires boroughs to work with infrastructure providers, so our utilities companies, the NHS, TfL, many more, to ensure that infrastructure is in place as development is occurring and that the development is phased accordingly. This is ultimately to prevent homes from coming forward without services, transport and infrastructure in place to support them. And finally, the policy allows for additional infrastructure asks to be made of development proposals. So those people coming in with, the build, where proposals exceed the capacity identified already. So you're safeguarding against building housing without supporting infrastructure. D3, optimizing site capacity through the design-led approach, the key thing that we're talking about, requires housing numbers on sites to be optimized through the design-led approach. It seeks to ensure design options are considered at the early plan making stage, again, long before a planning application comes in, to determine the most appropriate form of development that responds to the site's context and capacity for growth. And the policy also provides certain requirements for form and layout, the experience of the site, and quality and character, and how you consider those. And then once the site has been identified in local authority local plans, after having gone through this design-led process and community engagement, D3 then allows for the refusal of applications that do not then accord with the site allocation. D4 to D7 policies focus on the specific aspects of delivering good quality design. So that includes your space standards, your inclusive and accessible design considerations, and it accounts for the needs of our diverse communities as well. Housing policies are focused on housing targets and supply sources. Slide, please. Thank you. So the Good Quality Homes for All Londoners guidance is made up of a mayor's forward, and 4 modules that work together to support the implementation of policies to deliver ultimately good quality of life for residents. And considering that, the guidance builds upon the policies that I've just discussed. So Module A clarifies how a site's suitability and capacity for development should be assessed and determined at the plan making stage. So that's when a borough is making local plans. It provides guidance and tools for carrying out the design-led method to standardise this process across London. Module B provides guidance for borough planning officers on assessing the quality of small site development and preparing design codes to increase housing supply from small sites, offering design code examples. And again, this is to help focus delivery on small sites to meet new London plan aspirations for smaller sites to boost supply. Module C provides a comprehensive set of technical standards and qualitative guidance for new homes. This is for use for those designing or planners assessing new housing developments, and it updates what was previously the old interim housing design guide of 2010, if anyone has used that or remembers that. Finally, Module D is a library of best practice case studies, which demonstrates how different aspects of the guidance can and have been delivered. So starting with Module A, optimising site capacity, a design-led approach. As I've noted, this module is aimed at borough plan makers in local planning departments to determine what capacity of homes is appropriate on a site based on the surrounding context and ensure that capacities are determined through this design-led approach. The process of examining the site during the plan making stage means that this can then be used to engage with the community at the option stage of plan making, so before it's become a plan, meaning that you get realistic capacities of a site being discussed long again before this application comes in. And this is way more beneficial for everybody, the community planners and developers who are going to be bringing forward those sites, in that, you know, you're engaging early and communities understand the potential change to the areas and can have a good kind of stake in how that works, and then everyone has a bit more certainty around what is acceptable. But it's also here to encourage developers as well to understand that when they are working up a design for a site, the expectation around the process of ensuring design-led development also applies, and that when it comes into a local planning authority, they're going to be looking to see that that process has kind of been adequately covered. And overall, this is aimed at standardising the way we estimate housing capacity across London. That doesn't mean it's designed to standardise the sites themselves, but standardise the way it's done, so we get that kind of variation in growth depending on the areas and how they've been identified. Slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about character studies and establishing the borough-wide context. London Plan Policy D1 is clear that area assessments are needed to inform the scale of growth that is appropriate for an area. So you cannot begin to look at a site, which is what we're largely discussing here, and carry out the design-led approach until you know if the area where the site's going to be has been identified for either extensive, moderate, or more limited growth and change. And this will be determined by what's already there, what needs preserving, or where there are opportunities for changes to be made. And that will all show up in the early character studies that boroughs participate in as part of their evidence base. So once the plan knows this, you have the evidence base, it then allows borough planning officers to carry out the design-led approach and figure out if the capacity of individual sites, or the capacity of individual sites, because you now know what might be appropriate densities and heights, and maybe even what other uses other than housing might be needed. So prior to going through the stages of how you determine a site's capacity, Module A has a short section that refers to area assessments or character studies. And this section encourages plan makers to consider that the character of the existing area means that the potential for change from future development might vary considerably across quite small distances. So it may be something, you may get something like what is pictured here across the whole borough. So this is a fake borough, theoretical borough, and it shows here what the results of a character study might show. So the conserve areas, which is the lightest purple, those might be the kind that have high quality environment already with well established and coherent characters that would need to, you would need to be more sensitive, you know, in bringing forward development. It would need to be more sensitive to the area that's already there. So an example of this kind of area might be a conservation area that's already identified for its historic or good quality buildings. The enhanced areas, the middle purple, might be areas of medium quality or mixed character that would benefit from sensitive improvement to what's already there, or improvement to existing buildings, but isn't really right for undergoing massive transformational change. And then finally, the darkest purple would be your transform areas. These would be areas of low quality or poorly defined spaces. And it gives opportunity for, you know, major enhancements and even new character to be introduced when you are looking at your individual sites. So an example of this might be areas that previously had high levels of industrial uses that may have moved on, leaving empty or barren sites and kind of illegible areas that, you know, the public ultimately don't benefit from. Slide, please. So once you've got your character study, you can then go about looking at individual sites and optimizing capacity through this design-led approach. So the Module A guidance sets out the stages to doing this. And you're not only assessing the capacity, but you're assessing the suitability for development. And it's a 3-stage process. So first you do your site analysis using capacity factors. You then decide the residential building types that are appropriate once you know the context of the site. And then you test the site capacity. And I'm going to talk now briefly about those stages. So the first stage, site analysis using capacity factors. The guidance walks through the assessor, which will usually be the planner, but should also be being used by developers, and what they would need to consider in terms of site qualities and character. And it provides questions for each capacity factor that the assessor should be asking themselves and analysing to ultimately aid the analysis of the site. So you would analyse the existing site qualities and character that might be the physical site characteristics and conditions, the existing and proposed infrastructure, any existing planning policy guidance and history, the heritage and historical significance, green infrastructure, connectivity and access to transport services, local knowledge and feedback, very important, and pollution, air and noise, and then of course the overall deliverability of the site. And this would help you determine the appropriate form and scale of development that was potential for that site. Stage 2, so residential building types. So in the guidance, we introduce a range of what are considered to be prevalent and successful housing types in London based on typical characteristics, so including their form, scale, and site configuration. And each type is accompanied by text on qualities and flexibility, so including things like typical heights and limitations. And the residential building types are recommended by us in this guidance as being the most commonly recognised in London, firstly, but also those that are best placed to address the standards set out in Module C, which my colleague Elliot is going to talk about in a minute. So, you know, these are the types that can produce good quality housing that really cover all those things that we want in Module C. And then each one links to a case study in Module D, so people can see real life examples of where these have been built out and actually meet all of those standards. And the guide at the moment distinguishes between the types that should be promoted to unlock the constrained small sites and those that would be best for optimizing capacity on large sites, depending on your context. So A, B, and C, that's our residential conversions, our houses, and our small clusters of detached and semi-detached and stacked masonettes. These are the ones that are probably best set to unlock those small infill sites. and D to G, the terraces, the linear blocks, the villa blocks, and the towers are best placed for, their role in the preparation of site-specific plans and design codes, and bringing forward those bigger sites. And here is just one example of what each residential building type is accompanied by in the text. There's a lot of text, so it'd be good to have a look and see what you think of the information that we've provided. But each type has ultimately its own profile, and it includes discussion over these typical characteristics, what heights might be common or appropriate, and how size and use mix can be incorporated. And it talks about limitations of each type. So a limitation for a terrace, for example, even though they are great in many ways. For example, they provide outdoor space. They're very fit for purpose in a lot of the suburban context or the outer London boroughs. They will be lower density than a linear block, and of course, unable to provide lifts or meet certain accessibility standards for those that need it. Next slide. Oops, excuse me. The guide also explains how to choose the appropriate types for the site. So once you've looked at your building types, how you configure those and how they can be arranged and combined in different urban arrangements for different purposes. So for example, a combination of residential types like terraces and linear blocks, villa blocks and towers might be best suited to optimize large sites. And the guidance then uses case studies to show how residential types have been combined in actual developments. It also provides guidance on layouts of mixed use sites as well. So it's not just all about building housing sites. The third stage, the testing the site capacity against what you've come up with, is a step-by-step guide to test these indicative capacities that a borough officer might think is appropriate for the site at the plan making stage, or to test design options if you're a developer to ensure that they've actually been optimized in the way that we're recommending. And so you take your site analysis in stage 1, which we've talked about, your building types and arrangements, stage 2, and then you use SketchUp 3D model to set out an appropriate arrangement of those sites to determine the capacity. So we're recommending a downloadable digital resource for our London boroughs, and that's the third stage, or these bigger bubbles. And once satisfied with the design options produced, sorry, can we just go back to that previous slide? No, previous. Thank you. Once satisfied with the design options produced, the residential gross external area can be taken from your modelled scheme using the indicative site capacity calculator that we also have alongside this guidance, which is an Excel document. And then when the tenure mix is inputted, this produces your indicative site capacity. And the type of tenure mix we would use at this stage would be based on whatever your local policy is. So if a particular borough has a policy that says 3-bedroom houses need to be delivered as 25% of the site, then you would use that as an indication of what might come forward. Finally, we can then produce an indicative scheme population using the GLA's population yield calculator to estimate the likely population and child yield to feed then into your infrastructure planning process. So you have a better idea of how many school places you might need in the coming years. And there is a full step-by-step guide to this stage set out in module A. So that can be read in more detail so you can see what we're recommending. I'm going to play you a demonstration now of, or my colleague is going to play you a demonstration of the SketchUp demo that we're talking about. So if whoever's sharing can unshare now, and Lara, if you can take over with a demonstration of the SketchUp.
Yes, sure, just doing that now.
This tutorial will show you how to use the indicative site capacity calculator. The purpose of this video is mainly to focus on how to use the SketchUp modelling tool. For more detailed guidance, please refer to the Good Quality Homes for All Londoners guidance. There are a couple of things to check before you start using the site capacity calculator. First, you'll need to make sure that your model's background is set to the correct unit. To check this, click on Window, Model Info, and make sure you've selected meters. Then load the housing type components by clicking on the components tray, Details, and select the folder with the toolkit. You should see the components appear here. Next, import your site plan into SketchUp. Make sure it's the correct scale. Before you begin modelling, make sure you have a good understanding of your site. The Good Quality Homes for All Londoners guidance provides a set of capacity factors to help you evaluate a site. Some examples of the questions you should consider include: what is the size, shape, and orientation of the site? Do existing open spaces, play areas, and landscaping contribute to the character of the place? Are there any heritage assets or protected views? Is the site close to local services and amenities? How do vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians access the site? Let's begin modelling. Once you've imported your site plan, draw up the proposed roads and connections. This should improve connections for people walking and cycling and make sure that vehicle access is safe and practical. In this model, we've created a road that connects on either side of the site and introduced a new pedestrianised route through the middle of the site. Next, add any existing or proposed open spaces. Green spaces should be considered early in the design process. If there are any non-residential uses, these should be located on the site. Now, select the residential types that are appropriate for the site. This should consider the scale and character of the area. An area assessment would help to identify if the site is located within a transform, enhance, or conserve area. In this model, we've assumed that the site is in an area for enhancement, with a listed building to the east and a high street towards the north. Using the digital toolkit library, a tower is located in the northwest corner of the site, away from potential sensitive views towards the listed building.
We have another technical issue. Again, I'm sorry about this. Have we frozen?
Yes, I'm sorry, we're frozen for some reason. Oh, there we go.
You'll notice that each block type has a footprint and shaded area to at least 2 sides. The shaded area is the approximate distance you'll need to offset the building to ensure that enough daylight reaches the lower levels. A row of terraces is placed along the southern part of the site, reflecting the scale and typology of existing terraces opposite the site. The proposed terraces form a new pedestrianised street through the site, with a courtyard block towards the north. Modelling the site allows you to test the appropriateness of several layouts and residential types before selecting the best option. This is an example of how the site might be modelled if the area is for enhancements. Here are some other examples if the site was in a Conserve area, which assumes the site is in a conservation area with various sensitive local views and listed buildings. This version shows how the site might be modelled in a transform area, where the site is next to a future public transport hub and close to lots of amenities. Once you're happy with the design options produced, open the Excel calculator provided to calculate the indicative capacity from the modelled scheme. Do this by entering the number of components by housing type and the number of stories. The calculator allows you to choose a tenure and bedroom mix. It then estimates the indicative capacity of your site. These modelled options are certainly not the only ones for the site, and they would need to be thoroughly tested if taken forward. But they can help give an early steer on the likely optimised capacity of a site and an early indication of the likely form and height needed to achieve that number.
Thank you very much, Lara, and sorry about that freeze in the middle. If my panel could turn on their cameras, it's time for some questions on Module A.
Okay, so we have had a few questions come through. So the first one is, what can be done to make the government understand that 47% of all new homes in London need to be affordable? they interested only in their mantra, everyone has the right to own their own home.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know if Celeste, you want to take this one?
Yep, I can do that one. So I guess we've always expressed this to the government, either through the London Plan, the IP, the London Plan evidence, and all of our recent responses on the Housing White Paper and the changes to the current system. We always make the government aware that affordable housing needs to be the priority in London. And the Mayor keeps on requesting meetings with the government to discuss this issue and funding for affordable housing. So we're doing the best we can. I presume the government knows this, but it's an issue of funding, and the government's priority is for people moving into home ownership.
I think it's worth noting that just for the purposes of this consultation, this guidance is not specifically about affordable housing. But of course, we do have policies on affordable housing, a very important part of the London Plan, and we do have guidance that accompanies that. We have also seen some really positive changes in London in terms of the within what we can do in terms of the number of affordable housing units that are being produced since the previous London Plan, and once we introduced what was the threshold approach to affordable housing. That's in policies H4 to H6 of the new London Plan, so I would recommend having a good look at those, as well as reading our recent responses, as Celeste noted, to the white paper and the other government consultation that was out at the same time, which was changes to the current planning system. But we continue to lobby and, of course, run our own affordable homes programme through our colleagues in Housing and Land.
Great, thank you, Michaela. Did anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay, so we'll move on to another question that's been asked, which a few people have put their thumbs up against, so it seems like it's popular. How does this capacity exercise take into account any constraints within or under the ground? For example, HV cables, gas or water utility, pipeworks, drainage, tube tunnels, etc.
Elliot, do you want to talk about that one?
Yes, let's have to sort of kick off with this one. So generally with sort of like high level capacity studies that we've done previously using the density matrix, you wouldn't take any of those factors into account. You wouldn't normally know about a lot of those particular restrictions or constraints on a site. The advantage, I guess, of this approach is you're looking at the site in a bit more detail when you're looking at the housing capacity on it. And if you know about particular restrictions, such as there's a tube line underneath it, you can help use that to inform where you place buildings. Like you wouldn't place a tall tower over the tube the tube line, but the level of detail in terms of finding out about particular cables or drainage pipes might not come about until you're working on the actual sort of detailed design of that site. So there will be some flex in that capacity assessment, because it won't know about maybe those some particular constraints. I don't know whether anyone else has any other sort of comments or sort of practical examples when they do their sites. I don't know if they're like Matt, do you have anything on sort of when we're looking a bit more detail on your sites in sort of pre-app? Does this occur?
Well, you certainly like larger sites, which would be the ones that are often allocated in local plans, and through the SCHLA process would be you'd have an understanding of what the main infrastructure or underground utilities concerns might be, and that survey information should be available when the local authorities say whether or not, as you say, there's a main sewer, large electricity cable, substation. That should all be part of the site analysis process, which I think is covered in module A of the guidance as things that should be looked at. And I mean, there's all kinds of design solutions to these. So it doesn't necessarily erode capacity, it just means it's got to be looked at in a certain way. And I think looking at site capacity in a bit more detail gives a more realistic picture of what's possible, but it doesn't necessarily constrain capacity. And it's definitely part of a good, a thorough approach to establishing capacity and design on key sites.
So yeah, as Matt said, the probably the chunkiest part of Module A is looking at all of these kind of constraints or site analysis factors and making sure that the individual assessor, so the borough officer in most cases, is really looking in detail and doesn't miss anything. So I'd recommend having a good look at that section of the guidance. We're asking, firstly, as part of the consultation, is this clear and concise? Can you make sense of it? Can you use it? And I suppose we at the moment don't think we've forgotten anything, but we're certainly open to anyone telling us if there's certain things that should also be considered in there that we haven't got. So that's that one. Laura, is there any more in the Q&A?
We have a few more coming through for sure. So we have another one asking, you said planning applications would be decided against local plan policies, but the planning white paper states that some proposed schemes will be decided on NPPF policies only. How will the London plan and the local plan policies be recognised in future if the changes are implemented?
Okay. I think the first thing to note is that the white paper proposals are proposals and they're a really, really long way off at the moment from actual implementation. And what they're saying is, okay, we could have less duplication at the local level, but it doesn't in any, or in our reading at least, preclude local policies from still existing. And it certainly doesn't preclude there still being a kind of regional level or a role for the Mayor's London plan. So whilst the paper is not necessarily as loud as perhaps it might be on what that regional level's role is, they are at the same time clear, and certainly clear in discussions with us, that the regional level will still be very important. So firstly, we don't really know what a new world planning system would look like because of the way the proposals are at the moment. And I think the second point to note is that, of course, this guidance is based on operating under the current system, but there are things it's highlighting that we still think work if what the white paper is proposing is actually implemented. And one of the things that is very clear is that the government have a renewed focus on design codes. So this would also be part of the decision-making process alongside these kind of local policies, whereby, you know, I'm about to talk about design codes, which is our module B section, in just a moment. But ultimately, design codes are kind of a way of front loading what a local authority expects, or kind of putting forward a policy in a different way. So therefore, there's more certainty about what can and should happen in an area. So we know that the government expect design codes to be the new thing. And we're certainly promoting that as well. So that's something that marries up. And we know also that the government are looking to produce a model design code of their own, which all dovetails with our guidance. You can also look at some of the detail of the white paper, which talks about these growth, renew and protect areas. And they broadly align, if you look, with our enhance, conserve and transform areas. So the idea that, you know, there should be categories of land that are coming out of character studies is very similar. So I suppose we don't at the moment see a role where the NPPF is the entire decision-making process for the planning system. There still will be multi-layers and this still would work. So that's that one. Elliot, do you have anything to add, or Celeste or anybody else?
No, I don't. I think you've covered it.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, what incentives is there for local planning authorities to undertake character studies where resources are already stretched? Will the additional burden slow down and complicate local plan preparation, or is the guidance seen as simplifying and consolidating existing practices? Given that this is plan-led, what is the estimated timeframe for changes to have effect?
So I'll take the first part of that question, and maybe Elliot can take the second about estimated timeframe for changes. The guidance is exactly as Thomas has put there. It's simplifying and consolidating what are existing practices. So you ultimately cannot plan make without an evidence base. And the point that we're making here is that this is the best way to come up with design, capacity studies through design, and that this is our expectations as a standard kind of way of doing things. And therefore it will come up with more realistic capacities for sites and it gives communities the opportunity to get really involved and to understand things long before this kind of planning application comes in. So it is recognised absolutely that boroughs are stretched, and I think the incentive for them to undertake character studies is just to get their plan out ultimately and have their own local policies. But I think it's worth noting that, you know, the guidance itself is there to standardize and streamline and get developers front loading in also their practices in thinking about what our expectations are. And then therefore the guidance in itself is something to help stretch local authorities and give them a tool to say, well, these are our expectations and this is what we've done. And as you've identified, this is work that needs doing already for site allocations. You've got to identify your board parameters, and you've got to do it in a way that, you know, is kind of transparent. So there are other ways that we are also helping, though, recognising that boroughs are stretched. We are in the large regeneration areas. We've got opportunity area planning frameworks running, which is where we work with the boroughs. And that's Matt and Eileen that are on the call today. So that would provide a great deal of help in terms of assessing your area and also assessing large individual sites and designing on them. We also have public practice now, which is our experts in the built environment and designers themselves that have gone into local authorities to add to resources. Many of those are now existing in local authorities regeneration teams, or some even in policy teams. So there is actual added resource there. We're also doing internal work with our own teams to ensure that where we're also involved in bringing forward sites, that process is standardized internally too. That's a big help. And we will continue to do things like UDL training and training for the boroughs to kind of really get this as part of their practice. So that's kind of all the ways that we're hoping this will help. Elliot, do you want to add anything about, well, what I've said, and also the estimated time frame for changes to take effect?
I think you sort of said it in terms of the purpose of the guidance and how it's actually a help rather than sort of an extra burden, hopefully, to local authorities. I think also in terms of timing, obviously this document and this approach is out there now. Obviously, we're going to be revising our guidance following the consultation and then putting out the final version. And I'll give the timings of that a bit later. But it's like this approach in essence is in the policy, and so that won't change, the design-led approach. And so boroughs should be taking this on board. And they will be doing this as they go through their local plan process. So it will vary across London depending on when boroughs are doing their site allocations in particular. When we get round to doing the new SHLA, obviously this will be the approach we use for doing that, but that we don't have any timings for that at this point in time. So it's a bit iterative. I think it's probably going to be over the next 3 or 4 years, just under the current system, that you'll probably see that this being rolled out across London authorities.
Great. So I think I will move on. We've just got 1 or 2 more questions, if that's okay, Michaela, at this point. So next question is, in the video demo, the selection of residential building type seems arbitrary and not to closely reflect context. Why did those towers pop up in a backstreet area that appeared to have a traditional terrace plan? How could the tool be strengthened to provide more guidance on selecting building types?
Either Elliot or our designers?
I'll start then. The guidance does give these sort of text, and the guidance explains why you would pick a particular type. So in section 2, so you're looking at the constraints and what are the advantages of using a particular type, and the guidance in section 1 about thinking about your sort of capacity factors, so like essentially understanding your context, are then synthesized in section 3 that basically say this is how you should sort of place them together. Obviously, this is relying on it's aimed at professional planners and urban designers, so expecting some level of knowledge about how you sort of put a site together based on its context, but it's taking you through the steps to make sure you're sort of thinking about them clearly. I don't know whether Lynn or Matt have anything to add to that.
No.
Yeah, I would say the part that isn't captured in the video itself is how you actually do the site analysis and use the capacity factors. And that's kind of a first really important stage that happens prior to actually starting the modeling on site. But the video itself was more of a demonstration of how you would start to then set up a model base and start placing these the residential typologies on the site. So the bit that is probably useful to refer to is the actual guidance itself, because then it sets out how exactly you should be, all the factors that you should be considering before you start the modeling.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so we just have one more question. We do have a couple more, but I think we'll just ask one more at this point. And then
if there are no questions on the module B part or limited questions on that, perhaps we can pick these other ones up if they come through. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll come back if we have time, as you said. So last question now is, has the indicative capacity of the SketchUp model been tested against actual sites that have been fully designed, and do the number of homes broadly align?
I'll start off with this one. So all the guidance was produced with consultants, May Architects, and they did test it against the sites that they've actually designed separately previously and have been built out to sort of make sure it worked. But we've also been using it for our opportunity areas and capacity. So I don't know if Lynn wants to talk about how I've been using it to sort of test those capacities.
So we have been using it internally for the OAPF work that we've been doing, and we've also done a little bit of kind of just diligence testing to see how accurately the tool reflects projects that are already built on site. So testing, for example, taking a built out project and rebuilding it with the tool capacity toolkit and seeing how closely those numbers align. We've tested it on a number of large sites, so the ones that are around 3,000 units, and it does come to more or less a similar type figure. It's not an exact science, but it gives a very close indication of what could be the capacity of a site. And similarly, we've done a lot of capacity tests through the OAPF work as well in Royal Docks and Thamesmead. I guess maybe one of the areas where it becomes much more difficult is when the site becomes much too small, and that's when you start seeing the limitations of the tool. But on medium to large size sites, they tend to be quite good broad indication.
Thank you for that, Eileen. I think we need to move on now, just being mindful of time. So if my colleague Jill from our tech team could share the presentation. Lovely. So I'm going to cover the module B, which is small housing developments, assessing quality and preparing design codes, a little bit briefer than in module A, but there's plenty of opportunity for you to have a look through that one as well and give us your feedback. If you do have any specific questions about this that we don't get through today, then do feel free to get in touch with us at the email address that's on the consultation page website. So module B is focused on small sites and design codes, and design codes are tools that can be used to set certainty about what type of development will be acceptable in an area. And by that I mean it describes the key design principles of a potential development proposal in a simple, concise and mainly graphic format. And by drawing on the proposal's approach to layout, massing and height, the code then defines the principal features that would make up the overall design integrity of the scheme. So following characterization study, which we've talked about, which determines your area's capacity for growth, we're recommending that planning officers then explore an area's context for the potential to accommodate different forms of small housing developments, and those small housing residential types are then link back to those we discussed in module A. So you can initially take a street in your area, look at street facing and backland conditions, for example, and then look at potential for residential conversions or extensions, or even infill development within curtilage of existing buildings, or any other thing that would be relevant to that particular local authority in terms of change, and you could produce a design code. So so this explores the typical conditions, this module, across London, which might be suitable for that small site development. And we've put in 2 template design codes for boroughs to support incremental intensification of residential areas. So the design codes link to Module C's design standards to ensure this quality development. So it all comes back and links around together. And then there are case studies of successful small sites development in Module D, which can be referenced when writing your design codes and best practice examples. And the idea of this is to show you what we are suggesting to the boroughs is a good way forward if they're going to produce design codes. And as I mentioned, we know that we have quite a focus on design codes and their role, but we also know that regardless of what changes do occur in the planning system, the government are quite keen on these too. So it looks like they're here to stay. So next slide, please. So here is a design code example. This one is a street facing upward extension. So hopefully you can see that. The text is a little small, but you can have a look in Module B if it's too small to see on this screen. So taking into account that the design code describes the key design principles of the development proposal in this kind of simple and concise way rather than reams of text, and defines the principal features that make up the overall design integrity, this is what you would come up with ultimately. And the design code, this is one particular example, but a design code could also cover things like boundary treatments, architectural treatments for conservation areas, private open space, gardens, green space mitigation, sustainable urban drainage, refuge and recycling, cycle and car parking, and access and inclusive design, and even specific heritage considerations. So it's kind of a very versatile tool for that smaller site or more incremental development rather than the large scale site allocations. Next slide. So each design code example comes with an analysis like the one we've pictured here, which describes the characteristics of the scenario that will inform the design, and then the illustration of how the key design principles within the scenario may be applied. So you can see here, at point 1, we're looking at how the streets are characterized by the consistent frontage. Number 2, with the sun, this is the orientation of streets and how the orientation may affect the approach to the upper level that you're going to build. So you're ensuring there ultimately that if you put this in a design code, the development does not unacceptably overshadow any nearby gardens and streets. You look at number 3, things like street widths, which may vary considerably across different areas of London. So again, the parameters for your upwards extensions to ensure there's enough daylight and sunlight for the existing homes that are there will change depending on that context. And again, number 4, back-to-back distances will also be something that changes what you decide to put in that design code or where you want to take it. And then there's other things to consider like street access for refuge collection, emergency services, and residential access. So that's mainly what we're doing with the design codes. Just next slide, please. The final part of the Module B design code examples is to include key parameters for the development and how they correspond to the performance against quality measures for Module C. So this is some quality measures that Elliot's going to talk about that are in Module C. So that's shaping good places and from street to front door and dwelling space standards. And this is what you would also add into your design code, but not all sections of Module C will be relevant to the form of development and location covered by any particular design code. So it's about the boroughs doing that assessment, or the person writing the design code doing that assessment and including it as you go. Next slide. I think it's just the question slide. Yep, that's it. So if you can unshare now, Jill, thank you very much. And our panel come back to me. And happy to take any questions on that section, albeit that one was quite a bit shorter. We may have to be quite quick with this one though, given timing.
We don't have any questions coming through with that particular section yet, but we still have a few questions that we haven't answered. So I don't know if now would be a good time to take a couple more of those, Michaela.
I think we could probably do 1 or 2.
Okay, we have got 2, so we'll do that. So one question we have is, given the intrinsic links between London's housing need and that of the wider southeast, is there a role for the GLA in collaborating with authorities outside London to help them apply similar models which could increase density and reduce regional housing pressure?
Elliot, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So we do have an ongoing engagement with the sort of wider southeast authorities, and talking about, transport infrastructure, housing, sort of generally. In terms of getting them to apply this, obviously this is a tool we're developing in London, and we're sort of honing it now through the consultation. But we obviously we can't force anyone to use it outside London, but if they want to, we'd be obviously going to be more than willing to help them understand it and help see whether it could be applied in their context.
Great, thank you, Elliot. So we just have one other we've got a few more coming through. There's a GLA website for small sites, public sites like unused police stations and TfL land. Are those sites having this modelling done before they're offered, or before interested developers or partners offer applications? Oh.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you want to take that one as well, Elliot? Or
But can you just repeat that one? I haven't seen it. Sorry.
Sure. So there is a GLA website for small sites, public sites like unused police stations and TfL land. Are those sites having this modelling done before they are offered, or before interested developers or partners offer applications?
Yes, so the capacity tool in module A is really aimed at larger sites, so not the below 2.25 hectares, primarily because the types that we use for the SketchUp model are starting at sort of houses, going to the sort of the terrace sort of form. The guidance in module B explains how you could look at particular issues with a smaller site. They're going to be quite varied, and these sites are very constrained, and so it would need a more sort of refined, detailed look to determine the capacity of a particular site. But so really, module B would be the thing that would be used to determine the capacity on the site. On this sort of housing and land sort of support for small sites program is about facilitating the sort of development of land, helping with the legal issues, helping developers find sites, and helping with them also find some small and medium-sized building companies to help develop it. So it's a slightly different angle that they're coming from, but obviously they obviously aware of this guidance, and this is what they should be, will be using when we get to sort of determining the actual capacity and planning permission for that site.
Okay, great, thank you. Did anyone else have anything to add to that?
no, I think that's about.
Okay, we have 1 or 2 more, but I think we might leave those till the end and let you get on with the presentation.
I did. So I noticed there was one about how many design codes we expect to use across London. So I thought I just sort of touch on that. So the intention with us sort of promoting the use of design codes in policy H2 and through this guidance is that using your sort of understand your characterization, you could apply it to quite broad areas. So it isn't designed that it would just apply to 10 housing units. It's their area wide. So you might have a large area with very similar. So the example of adding a story to terraces, you might have a number of streets in your borough that might be suitable for. And so then it would incrementally allow the owners of those sites those houses to add that story in a consistent way. So we wouldn't envisage there'd be thousands of design codes. I mean, there potentially could be, but a borough could, they'd just start off looking at the most obvious places first, and then developing them. So I don't know whether Michaela's got anything to add on that.
No, I think just to say that the point is that they offer freedom, and they offer freedom for you as the local area to determine what are the priorities and how to bring those forward. So the design code is exactly what it says on the tin, a template example. it doesn't mean in any way we're suggesting that this is exactly what it'll look like. So in terms of how many do we envision across London, how long is a piece of string at this point? But the idea is there is a drive in the new London plan through policy H1 and H2 to increase supply from small sites, and this is one way of doing it. I don't know if Celeste had anything else to add, and then we really do have to move on. No? Okay. Thank you very much, Laura. We'll save any till the end if we've got time. And now I'm going to hand over to Elliot to talk to you about modules C and D. Elliot, you're on mute.
If we can get the presentation up, that would be great. Thanks. Okay, just get that full screen. Excellent. Thanks. So I'm going to talk to you about module C and D together now. So module C presents a set of housing design standards for use when designing or assessing new housing. Quality of life for residents is at the heart of this guidance and runs as a golden thread throughout actually all the modules. Guidance is based around 7 key themes, and that's in module C I'm talking about. This goes from the scale of the neighbourhood through to the internal design of the home. Module D is a library of best practice case studies, additional information on the planning process, and a glossary of terms used within all the guidance modules. The case studies are organised by housing type, which are referenced throughout the guidance. So we're starting with small infill sites and going through to housing. So let's get to the next slide. Thank you. On that, keep it on that one. So here you can see the topics that are set out in module C, and the key design standards are summarised at the start of each module. The housing types illustrated in the capacity toolkit that Michaela talked about earlier have been selected due to their ability to deliver an environment that promotes good quality of life and to effectively meet the standards set out in this module. Therefore, quality of life factors that inform these standards underpin the method for identifying indicative site capacity in module A. In addition, the housing design standards are a tool for small sites design code preparation. As Michaela just sort of set out, you can pick particular relevant standards for the development that design code's dealing with. And this ensures that the human experience is inherently captured and considered at the earliest stage in the planning process. But these standards also serve as a standalone guide for delivering good quality housing. Module C references best practice examples in Module D to highlight case studies that perform particularly well in relation to specific design standards. So I'll now focus on a couple of the sort of standards in Module C and the relevant case studies in Module D to show how it's intended to work. So you can move to the next slide, please. So the design standards consist of qualitative descriptions and technical standards in order to set a benchmark for the highest quality of housing development. So for example, in the spatial quality standard shown here, it covers ceiling heights. The technical standard in it for C 4.3.2 is a requirement for a minimum floor to ceiling height of 2.5 meters. But there's much more detail in the guidance and explains the situations when a lower ceiling height is allowed. And this sets a maximum area that can be below the minimum height and explains why that can be allowed. The guidance also encourages higher ceiling heights, particularly for ground floor dwellings, and a ceiling height of 2.6 meters in all habitable rooms is desirable. It explains how additional height can help improve daylight and sunlight penetration into the home, where the site's constrained and compromised by compromised light levels. And in ground floor dwellings where daylight might be limited, high ceiling heights can provide better light levels and a better urban scale to the base of large buildings, and they can give better potential for that home to be used more flexibly. So in the next slide. So here's one of the case studies. This is the format of the case studies is the same throughout. So it's a bit of a 2-page spread. And they explain how this particular case study meets a particular design standard well. And then and you have a site plan layout, and then a axiometric drawing to sort of highlight key features and then the particular standard that's being referenced is pointed out in those diagrams on the right hand side. And then the green box on the right hand side is a consistent set of statistics and information about the site, so you can compare and understand a bit more detail about what's being provided on that particular development. So in this particular development, it's a good example of meeting the ceiling height standards, and the ground floor ceiling heights here are up to 3.2 meters. So this is to allow for a community space is also provided on the ground floor, and this also enabled the other residential units that were built on the ground floor to have much more generous floor to ceiling heights. So moving to the next slide. So meeting minimum internal space standards as set out in this table is a very important standard, and the guidance provides more detail on this. So this actual table is in the London Plan, and it's a policy requirement, but the guidance in module C gives better explanation of how you achieve and use this square meterage. So it gives guidance about the room layouts and how you design the internal space of a flat, move to or house, what depending on the case may be. If you move to the next slide. So linked to the internal space is obviously the outside space. So this is we're now requiring in policy that private outside space is provided, and we set minimum areas as well. So there's a minimum area, and there's also a minimum dimension of the outside space to ensure that it's actually usable space. The guidance explains how these minimum standards can apply to irregular shaped balconies. So I'll give an example if you move to the next slide. I'll give a couple of examples about how these standards have been applied. So this case study shows how it meets the space standards well. So this is a small sort of infill site development, so demonstrating that this our case studies vary from different scales of development. So despite the constrained nature of this small site, the house still managed to deliver a generous internal space, while the layout and arrangement of the windows enhance the quality of that space. So there's a window that wraps around over the roof light at the front of the dwelling. You can just sort of see it sort of on the sort of first floor level there on the right. And this is key in terms of providing outlook because it's viewable from the living room as well as the bedrooms, and also providing sort of privacy as well. And the L-shaped plan form that you can see in the sort of plans to the right create a courtyard garden for outdoor amenity space. So this creates increases a generous glazing facade around that courtyard, so it allows light but also provides privacy to the occupants and to the neighbours. If we move to the next one. So Brentford Lock West demonstrates how to meet and exceed the outside space requirements well. So each villa block has a deep balcony running the full width of the side of the building, accessible from all rooms of the apartments, and the size of these balconies exceeds the minimum. And then there are other apartments that have balconies that wrap around the corner to offer two aspects. So this is showing how in this sort of much larger development than the previous one, it's also showing how it's successfully met that space requirement that's for outside space. If we move to the next one. So back to Kirkfell again. So this also, as well as it early demonstrating the ceiling height standards that it met well, it's shown how it meets the private outside space standards. So the balconies extend the full width of this duplex building, both levels, so substantially exceeding the minimum space requirements for outside space. And the balconies also have a generous width to allow sufficient space for furniture and use by a range of people. So that shows how one particular case study illustrates a number of points well. So that's a sort of overview of how we intend the guidance to work. So it's showing that the standards we put there are achievable in practice, and a variety of different case studies show that. So, and you can also see whether they're the mix of social and market housing because obviously that has implications for the sort of the viability of the scheme, but it shows how all these different schemes are still meeting the standards well. So I think if we move just to questions now, so if we get the panel back.
So we don't have anything, let's see. Oh yeah, here's a question that has come through. Consideration of floor area and ceiling height separately possibly misses a trick. In circumstances where floor area on a tight infill site may fall slightly short of the floor area, but can offer greater internal height and sense of space, would a consideration of cubic space offer another tool to consider the spatial quality? Interestingly, hospitals, schools, etc., up to the 1970s were specified in cubic feet.
So I'll happy to start that one. The floor area, the minimums have been worked out and are quite. We've been using them for a number of years, and so they're the minimum sort of for functional space for Londoners that have been worked out. So we're not that going below them is not really considered acceptable. There's advantages obviously in having higher ceiling heights particularly in London where and in dense urban environment, because that does give you a greater perception of space. And so we're setting down minimums. We suggest and encourage them to be exceeded somewhat. But one way you can still keep to the minimum but make a place feel bigger is to have the higher ceiling. So we wouldn't be in planning terms and planning permissions acceptable to have a reduced floor area, but a taller ceiling height.
Anyone else have anything to add on that one? Okay.
No. Okay. So we have another question, which is a little broader. Does your organisation plan social housing? Is there only one specific category of buildings for social housing independently of the features of the area?
The answer to that is we are involved in the development of social housing, but we're not specifically the planners of social housing across London. That would be different registered providers and different architects and developers and designers, all of which work on social housing much as any other type of housing. So it's very varied, and there certainly isn't one specific category of building for social housing independently of the features of the area. It would absolutely go through the same process as every other building in the same way that we're suggesting here, and it's not categorized in any different way.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michaela. I don't see that we have any additional questions coming through.
There's also the observation rather than the question, which is...
Yes, I can read that out. So yes, we just have an observation through as well, which you may not be able to see, which is conserve, enhance, transform sounds a lot like protect, renewal, growth areas from PWP proposals. The site capacity tool could also be applied wider than London as a good way of testing capacities for different zones. If anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I already raised, and potentially this observation was made before I mentioned that one of the dovetails between the white paper proposals that are at this point just proposals and very early stage is the growth, protect, renew is very similar to the conserve, enhance, transform. How that would then go on to be applied to zoning under a new system is still very much, unknown, but sure, if other local planning authorities wanted to apply that as a good way of testing, I think that would be very reasonable. Celeste, did you have anything to add to that?
I think it's just a happy coincidence that London's leading the way.
Yeah, very good point. Lara?
Oh, I think Matt has something just to add.
Sorry, I was just going to say the character studies are just a really valuable tool in fostering and supporting really good design that responds to a place, and they're a good opportunity for the public to get involved in kind of the debate, the discussion, the framing of what their borough, their place is like now, and what it might be, what its potential might be in the future. So I think that kind of process that's laid out in the in this guidance is applicable throughout, and I think it'll be, you know, it's a good way of plan making and a good way of fostering good, well-designed development, if that made any sense. Yeah.
You're just on mute there, Michaela. So we just have one more sort of comment or any comment to see if you have any thoughts on this as well. For clarity, modules A to D are written for industry professionals.
Yes, they're aimed at different audiences depending on the module. So module A is particularly aimed at the boroughs, but will be used by developers for doing sort of site capacity, and also setting a way of testing a site for a borough when they get a proposal from a developer. So there's a consistent way everyone can agree on about what they're looking at to determine the capacity. Module B is aimed at boroughs for doing assessing small sites, but also architects to designing small sites. It also setting out sort of how you do a design code. Now, when the borough takes that on and develops its own area design codes for different parts of its borough, that will involve that, you know, the local, you know, a consultation on producing that design code, and that will involve local residents. And one of the purposes of the design code is to get that front loading of engagement with local residents, so everyone has an understanding of what sort of development and agreeing what sort of development is acceptable to deliver the housing that we need. So finding the best way to do that and so hopefully that has a sort of wider appeal. Module C, although it's aimed at a range of people, but it also, you know, it's aimed at the designers and then also at the people assessing planning applications, but then it can also be used by the public to have an understanding of what is acceptable standards of housing in London, and also if they were designing their own scheme, thinking, well, what are the key issues they need to be thinking about for maybe a smaller scale project that they might be doing. I don't know, does Michaela, do you have any further thing to add to that?
No, other than just that inevitably, because it's a guidance that accompanies policy that ultimately is being interpreted by industry professionals to develop, that if you like, it's for them. But I think it is hopefully a useful and clear resource for the community also to understand the direction of travel and the expectations. And that's certainly something that we want to hear from individuals as well. You know, is this clear and kind of comprehensive enough, and how do you feel about the guidance? That's all part of the consultation, so please do let us know. I think we've just got 5 minutes left now, so perhaps we wrap that up, and then we've just got a few more slides to go just to talk about the consultation. So Elliot, I think you're going to take over again, and Jill perhaps share.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So just as a recap, we've got the consultation running from 13th of October. It started and goes to the 15th of January. We've been running a series of workshops for different groups, and obviously this is one of those. And we really encourage you to go to the consultation site and give your feedback via the sort of survey questions that sort of help steer and us get the most useful feedback from you, so we can think about how to improve the actual documents, and also give us an understanding of with how usable these documents are. And the link at the bottom of the page is how you get there, but you can just googling the title of this guidance, you'll find it, or go to the GLA web page for planning guidance and you'll find the link pretty easily there. So we go to the next slide. So just to set out what we're going to do next steps. So all your feedback will be reviewed. So we're able to the new year, early in the new year, and it will inform the final guidance that we produce. we'll have a consultation summary document that we publish alongside the final guidance, so setting out how what we've done to engage. So before we produce this draft and afterwards, during this consultation, how that's informed the final version. And we're expecting to have the final version of this guidance and other guidance documents we're producing, so we're consulting on at the same time in early next year. And that the reason for that seeming probably a bit far in the future is because we've got the mayoral elections in May, and there's a purdah period before there that kicks in March, which we, the mayor and can't make any decisions. So even though we might have the document ready, we'll need to wait for the elections and whoever's mayor at that time to agree the final version. Go to the next slide. And so we just also to highlight that you can get, if you need different formats for the survey, please contact us and we can help provide those. And also that there's 4 other planning guidance documents being consulted at the same time. They were all published in March as well, earlier this year, so ahead of expected election. So they've been sitting around for a while, and we've put the final versions out in October this year, and we'd really welcome your engagement and thoughts on those documents as well. So I think we're on to the last slide, which is sort of final questions, I think. So if we come back as a panel.
Yes, so I think we have time for maybe one more question. It's a little bit of a long one, so bear with me. So we have a question. The build to rent sector is well placed to continue to provide a significant proportion of the additional homes that Londoners need. However, there is little reference to build to rent within this draft consultation documentation. Where build to rent is referenced, the principles established in the Affordable Housing and Viability SPG of 2017 regarding flexibility in building layout design, paragraphs 4.30 to 4.33 in particular, have not been reflected here. This SPG referred to the differences in design approach due to the value of on-site management and purpose-built design. This guidance is also referred to at paragraph 4.11.14 of the proposed new London plan. Can the build to rent sector be reassured that similar language will be included within the final version of the proposed SPG? This would of course apply equally both to the market rent homes as well as the affordable homes that are integrated within such developments alongside communal amenity and management spaces.
So I'll answer that. I'll start it. In the London plan, the policy D6 on housing quality and standards, we're quite clear that the housing standards apply to all forms of self-contained housing, and that includes built to rent. And that's particular issues because with these, we regard the issues to the standards in Module C as sort of like the basics for ensuring that any house is, any home is suitable to live in. So such as avoiding single aspect dwellings and making sure you meet the minimum space standards. We're aware that obviously some schemes provide enhanced facilities such as communal space, etc. And these are supported additions, but they're not instead of meeting the minimum space requirements and minimum standards. So the language that there's an intent. It was intentional that we didn't include that line from the 2017 guidance. Carla, do you want to add anything?
No, I think just the only other thing to add is the more feedback we get though from consultation from any area and any industry, including those leading on build to rent, would be helpful and allow us to consider that as part of our overall analysis. So I'm just going to repeat the mantra that we really do want to hear from you, and please do, if you can, fill out the survey that is on the consultation page, because that will help us with analysis. I think we're just over time, so I'm afraid that there isn't time for the last few questions, but you are welcome to contact us if you wish through the email address that is on the consultation page website. As I mentioned, this will be recorded, and this has been recorded rather, and it will be put up on our YouTube page if anyone wants to revisit. So all that's left to say is thank you very much. You've been a very lively bunch, and it's really good to have so many questions. This has been my best one so far. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your days.